be a sponge, and then bring the juice.
By focusing on your improvement, by focusing on your progress, and eliminating any fixed mindset that you may have and acts of perfectionism, then you encourage your own mastery.
On some level, we do what we want to do 24 hours a day. Now, sometimes it may not seem like that, but if I'm choosing to work instead of sleep, what I'm actually saying is keeping my job is more important than sleeping.
I'm tired of this. I'm tired of getting beat. What can I do to get over this hump? So mentally, that's when I kind of put that forefront, like, hey, it's either all or nothing.
I like to put failure in quotations because I don't believe that failure is true failure if you're looking at it with the right mindset.
The truth is, the journey to greatness is hard. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes focus, and every day you have to decide what you value, what you want to pursue, and what you want to achieve. And if you dig deep enough, if you push hard enough, we all have what it takes to be great. Welcome to the Edge of Greatness. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Edge of Greatness podcast. I'm your host, Charles Schultz, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, filmmaker, author, consultant, and storyteller, Jude Charles. Jude, thank you so much for taking time to join me today.
Charles, thank you for having me, man. I'm really looking forward to this. My life has been all a bit about greatness, and so I'm definitely looking to dive deep into that conversation today.
Awesome. Well, one of the things I saw when I was preparing for our conversation is you wear a cape when you speak, and so I need to know, what's the story behind the cape?
So the cape that I wore was at an event called the Copywriter Club in Real Life. It is in honor of David Ogilvy. Ogilvy was an old school advertiser in New York. But I read his biography, and in his biography, he talks about how he wore a full-length black cape to meetings. And so, and it was his way to stand out. He was this eccentric and quirky, and he wanted to stand out, so he wore a black cape. He was brave enough to wear a black cape, and that's why I wore a black cape to that event. I've been speaking at that event, the Copywriter Club in Real Life, for 4 years now, I think. They keep asking for the black cape, so I keep bringing it back.
Well, I love that. I think that's an interesting thing. And for myself, I'm a big superhero fan. So anytime I see a cape, I'm like, man, there's got to be a cool story behind that, because people don't just grab capes and start walking around in public. That's just not a normal thing. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
To build off of that, with the hero concept in mind, who's your hero?
My hero was my father. So I am the youngest of 10 children, but my dad was like the center of our family. He passed away in 2014, but that was my hero, mainly because he taught me the work ethic that I have today. Now, there's the good and bad side to it, but what he taught me is you do whatever it takes to reach the goal. If you have a goal in mind, you do whatever it takes. And because of that, I grew up pretty comfortable. I'd say we weren't poor, but we weren't wealthy. Power never went out at home. There was always food on the table, always had school clothes. So that was my hero, was my dad. He taught me what it meant to be a man. Not necessarily through words, because he wasn't a man of many words, but through his actions. And I wrote a book in 2022 that I launched, and the book is dedicated to him. And in the dedication, I say, you've taught me what it meant to be a man. So that's why this book is dedicated to you.
I love that. You mentioned something in there that was interesting. So you mentioned doing whatever it takes. And I've heard you say before, keep going no matter what. Yeah. Is there a time when doing whatever it takes or keep going no matter what is bad advice?
Absolutely. I think so. In 2020, in the height of the pandemic, while everyone else was at home, I was still out working. I was one of 5 people on an airplane traveling to film with my clients. So the way I work with clients is that I create documentaries for them. That means I go to where they are to film them either in their home, at their office, see what life looks like every day. Well, the three clients I had at the time were still working throughout the pandemic, so I continued working. And I only continued working out of fear because I had started my business in 2006. 2 years later was the 2008 recession. And I knew what it meant not to make $1 for 6 months. And I assumed with the pandemic coming, it would happen again. By October of 2020, I woke up early in the morning, 7 a.m. I opened my eyes, but my heart was racing, my teeth were clenched, and I could not move my body. I felt paralyzed. I laid there for about 2 hours. And once I was finally able to get out of bed, I called my therapist and was officially diagnosed with burnout. So yes, growing up, when I started the business at 17 years old. And then I prided myself on keep going, no matter what. Keep going, no matter what gets in your way. Don't stop, don't look back. Well, I'm in my 30s now. And what worked for me in my 20s don't work for me in my 30s. So I had to learn new ways to work and new systems to work. Before we recorded, I mentioned to you I only work 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So yeah, there's although it's good advice to keep going no matter what, there are moments in life where you need to take a break, to reassess, to see what is happening. Even in sports, we do that, right? So like in football, you go all the way up until February. February is usually the Super Bowl, and then they take from February up until maybe, I'd say July, when they start training again. You take that time off, you spend it with your family, you rest, you reevaluate, how do we win a Super Bowl next year? How do we get closer than where we were the year before? And so keep going no matter what is one of my favorite quotes from Reginald F. Lewis, but I also had to learn how to slow down and to truly take a break so that I don't continue to burn out in the way that I did in 2020.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important point, because I think a lot of people who are chasing big things don't know how to pump the brakes. They don't know how to slow down. They don't know how to take a step back. So what are some tools that you've learned through your experiences to help manage not achieving burnout again?
I think the biggest one is rest, right? So rest is a secret weapon. When you're going after big goals, the reason that I burned out, and I had to learn this after burnout, but burnout is caused by continuous stress. It's not necessarily that you are, when you're burnt out, you feel unmotivated. You feel like not getting out of bed. You don't feel like there's any purpose in life. But that only happens when you're overstressed. You're stressed for a long period of time. And so what I've done is created ebb and flows. The reason I only work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is because the 4 days that I'm off is the 4 days I get to decompress. I don't look at my phone as much. I don't do any client work. And so the first thing is rest. The second thing, though, that's really been powerful for me is just getting outside every day, taking a walk, whether it's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, getting outside to walk. And for me, what that's done is it just gives me an opportunity. It reminds me to breathe, because when you're outside, you're taking a walk, you slow down, you breathe. That's the second thing. I think the third thing, though, is it's hard to describe this, but it's like, I don't believe in balance. And why I don't believe in balance, because in anything that you're doing that is hard, it takes time to do it. So there's going to be a season that you work really, really hard, and then a season where you slow down. But I think the third one is to completely what's the word I'm looking for? I'm a person that likes to I can tend to get overstimulated. So to destimulate yourself. In December of every year, from December 1st to December 31st, I completely unplug. No technology. I don't see any friends or family. I completely unplug from noise. To me, that has been the greatest game changer, because when you subtract the noise, you're finally able to hear what you think, and not what other people think, not what social media tells you to think, not even what podcasts tell you to think. It's what you think, what is true to you, what's at your core. That's how I found, and the reason I said I don't believe in balance is because I was going to start by saying that's how I found balance. But I think that's what's helped me continue to reset. and figure out, okay, what is it that fuels me? What is it that feeds me? What is it that's driving me? What's in the driver's seat? And do more of that next year. If it's positive, do more of that next year.
Yeah. No, I think that's an interesting way of looking at it, because I would agree with you that it's not necessarily balanced. It's finding ways to be able to refuel. It's kind of like, you're going to go hard. Eventually, you're going to run out of gas. So how do you get more gas in your vehicle? Well, you make a quick pit stop, And if you're pursuing something worth any value and that you care about, you don't want to be looking for balance, because then you might stop while you're on a roll. You might need to continue to push more than you normally would. And I think that's an interesting thought. And I've never really looked at it from that perspective. So that's awesome. But I also heard that you sometimes take June and December, so you get a couple breaks in there. Did you take one this June? Did you get a break?
I did take one this June. So June is a bit different from December. June, I don't do work, but I still will engage on social media, or I'll this June specifically, I went to see a lot of different friends that I probably hadn't seen in a while. So like I went to Atlanta to spend time with my best friend. So June is a bit different because it's for me, I haven't always taken June and December off. I've always taken November, December off. But after burnout, I realized part of the reason I was burning out was because I would go from January to October. And then by the time October comes, I'm like completely exhausted. So what I've done is kind of taken a mini break in June. I still take the whole month off. It's June 1st to June 30th. But it's more of like, okay, I'm going to see people that I haven't seen. I'm going to do things that I probably haven't done normally. Around that time, I also like spent 2 hours outside instead of my normal 30 minutes to an hour. So yeah, I still take June off. I still take December, but December is the real one that is just like, I completely unplug. And that's my time. It's almost a form of meditation. So like last year, I went to Nashville, Tennessee to a cabin for a week, and it was just completely quiet. I didn't look at my phone one time. There was a trail right behind the cabin. So I spent time out in the trail and just almost meditating. I can hear my own thoughts finally. I didn't have to hear everybody else's thoughts. But yeah, I still take June off. I'm just now coming off of, I call it a sabbatical. So I'm just now coming off a sabbatical. But it's needed because here's the other thing. Like, and I mentioned stress. What happened this year, right before I took a break? I filmed with a client who was having an event right before Memorial Day weekend. It was a 3-day event. The event was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Well, Thursday, we were filming an interview with the client outside of the conference room. We get back into the conference room, and my head of production, Jason, looks at me and he says, "We just got robbed." Someone had walked into this conference center. Me and my team came in with 4 cameras and 10 lenses. Because we were to the side filming with the client, someone walked in and stole 2 cameras, 8 lenses, $20,000 worth of equipment. Now, normally, the reason I bring up that story is because normally I'd work from January to October without a break, which means I'd go right from that event to maybe working with another client in June. Because I got the break, I got a chance to breathe, to reassess, to feel what I was feeling. Now, I handled the situation in the moment because it's almost like being in a car accident. Like you get in a car accident, the first thing you want to make sure is, are you okay? Are all the people in the cars that were in the accident, are they okay? But once I got back home, it's just like coming from a car accident. That's when your body aches the next day. You wake up the next morning, your body aches. Well, that's what was happening for me. It was just like, wait, in my 16 years of being in video production, never gotten robbed. I've never even lost so much as a mic or a battery. But someone came in one day and stole $20,000 worth of equipment. That sucks. But because I had June off, because I scheduled in time to break, it helped me reset, reanalyze what kind of SOPs do I need now to make sure our equipment stays safe, right? To me, I don't believe in the hustle culture that you just keep going. And it wasn't just because I burnt out. I had believed that well before, because I've been doing the breaks since 2013. But in my 30s, I see the breaks as something different now. In the same way that you are training and you train your body differently every year, I have to train my mind differently as I continue to grow. As I take bigger risks, I've got to train my mind differently. And that's what those breaks help me do.
I love that. And I think that's a valuable piece too, because what's really cool about that story is bad things are going to happen in life. And if you are always going, you don't have a moment to, this is how I'm feeling. And I think that's a valuable piece to this, is that it's okay. We're human. We're going to have emotional moments. And if we lock them all up all the time and we just keep moving forward, eventually we're going to have either a mental breakdown or a burnout situation or something bigger. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit, and I want to know what drew you to storytelling.
I always loved storytelling. As a kid, I wasn't the kid that played video games or even played outside, played sports outside. I was the kid that after school, I would lock myself in a room and I would write these 100-page books of what I thought my future life would look like. I think you would appreciate this. I wrote a book called The Baseball Life of Jude Charles because I thought I could grow up and be a baseball player. I also wanted to be a police officer. That was my first passion. I wrote The Police Life of Jude Charles. But that's what drew me to storytelling, is I understood, and I don't know how, to be honest with you, but I understood that storytelling was powerful and that if I could dream it, maybe I could obtain it. And so it wasn't until I got into high school that I really looked at how can I make this a reality. Of course, you get into high school and you think about what comes next. You think about being an adult. Well, for me, I wanted to get into broadcasting. I didn't think I could do it in high school, but I had a TV production teacher, Mrs. Donnelly, who she saw that I had a talent in video production. She taught me everything that she knew. And then towards the end of the school year, she said, Jude, you're really, really talented at video production. You should start a business. I was like, okay, I've already told you, I'm the youngest of 10 children. Everyone in my family had been to school. I'm the youngest, so I was the last one. So I was like, okay, that sounds cool, but I didn't know if I wanted to do it. But the following day, Mrs. Donnelly came into the classroom, May 5th, 2006. I'll never forget it. She handed me a yellow envelope. And inside of the yellow envelope was my first set of business cards. And that's what literally got me started on this journey that I'm on, where I mentioned I started the business at 17. It was because of Miss Donnelly. But storytelling is just always something I've been passionate about. Like I said, I first started writing, then filmmaking, and now I consult as well. It's a human trait, a human element that from the time we're born, our parents are telling us stories. Now, they could be stories they're reading to us in books, or they could be stories about where they come from. But we're wired for stories, and I've always been fascinated by that.
Have you had a chance to tell Miss Donnelly that story?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I still actually talk to Mrs. Donnelly. She's in her 60s now, so close to retirement. Yeah. But yeah, we're still connected. And I tell her that all the time. Anytime I get an opportunity to tell someone how I got started, I never forget to mention Mrs. Donnelly, because it was only because of her that I became an entrepreneur. I would have never done it. I would have never even thought I could do it. I actually still have the very first business card that she gave me. I framed it, right?
That's awesome.
But it's because I didn't know it was a special moment until years later. But yeah, I always remind her, like, I wouldn't be where I am today without her.
What was your favorite story growing up?
The Jackie Robinson story. That's why I wanted to be a baseball player.
Okay.
I had read his book, which I forget the name of it now, but it was his autobiography about his life. And I was just like, he went through every obstacle that there could be in life at such an early age, and he overcame it. And it showed me that, so I'm African-American. If you're listening to this, you can't see this, but I'm African-American. And it just showed me that anything was possible at that young age. I was born in 88. So, 8, 9 years old, it's 1997, 98. I just knew anything. He showed me in his autobiography that anything was possible. And that is why that was one of my favorite stories growing up.
I love that. I think that's a valuable, powerful story, and especially because the belief factor, and I think that's a big part of where success comes from, is ultimately believing that we have what it takes to not be there now, but to get there. And I think that that's the biggest thing, is we have in us an ability to work for anything we want if we're willing to do the work. And that, it sounds like, inspired you to want to do the work to break down all the barriers that might be in the way and achieve excellence. Is that fair?
Yeah, my parents are from the country of Haiti. And so I mentioned earlier that my dad, through his work ethics, through seeing his work ethic, seeing his actions, I learned the same thing. Well, Haiti is one of the poorest countries in the Western Hemisphere. And my parents came to America to give us a better life. I think that was always instilled in me, that you work hard to get where you want to go. And again, when I read the biography, one of my very first biographies I ever read was of Jackie Robinson, and I see the story of the struggle, that everything he went to, but then he was the person that could accomplish, that could pave a way. If I wanted to play in baseball, that paved the way for it. It reminded me of my father's story, who paved the way for his family. Right. And so that's why, yes, 16 years later, the only reason I am still standing and still running a successful business is because I understood that when hard things come, push through it. Now, the other part I didn't learn was taking a break, which I had to learn later. But when hard things come, push through it. And it's when you push through it, when you keep going, even when it gets difficult, you surprise yourself at what you're able to do. Right. I heard this story years ago before he passed away, but I love Kobe Bryant's story, where he was in the gym at like 4 a.m. and he would not stop until he got, I believe the number was 1,000 shots in a row. And what I love about that is you keep doing the thing that seems like it's boring, the thing that seems like it's monotonous, the thing that seems like it's not the next shiny object. It's not the thing that gets you excited. But if you put in the repetition, you keep doing the same boring thing, you create a level of mastery. My father was a construction worker. And it's that level of mastery that I learned from him, watching him not only in his regular job as a construction worker, but when he came home to build things. It's boring, it takes time, but that's how you reach your goal, is you keep going no matter what. And so, yeah, stories like that of understanding what's possible. 17-year-old kid who thought, hey, all I needed was business cards and a video camera to run a business. That's what's driven me to this day, is the naive thought of that, but also the idea that if I just put one foot in front of the other, I can be here sitting with you today, Charles.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's great. And so I'm curious now, because you've written all these stories, you've told all these stories, and when you look back and you think about the stories and what you've put out there in the world, and you think about where it started from, how different does your life look today than the stories you told yourself as a child?
Very different. I laugh because I recently started reading some of those stories. There's one story I wrote that I wanted to run a security firm, and I don't know why, but I wanted to run a security firm, and then in that security firm, I would somehow become the sheriff of my town. Obviously, none of that happened. But what I loved about reading those books, and I still have been reading through some of them, what I love about it, that I'm actually trying to retrain myself now, is the power of imagination. I don't know that I dream and imagine as much as I used to. Yet, are there goals? Absolutely. But are there crazy goals that maybe I don't even know how to accomplish right now that I'm going after? I'll say this: in my sabbatical last year, December 2021, I came up with the idea that I would retire from video production in 5 years. So in 5 years, I will be 37 years old. I will have been doing video production for 20 years. And it's like, what else could you do? One idea that I have is to go in, it's called leveraged buyouts, but to purchase other businesses with other people's money, which is essentially a venture capital firm. But how does a guy who's been running a video production for 20 years run a venture capital firm? Like, those two things aren't alike at all. But that is what I'm training my mind, is to continue to imagine, to see things differently. Because the only difference between someone like a Steve Jobs or a Jude Charles is imagination. In my mind, it's perspective, the way that you see things. I have this thing that I often say, vision versus perspective. We all are born with eyes we can see. That is vision. But unless you wear the right pair of glasses, you may not be able to read the words that are on a screen, or read the words that are on a billboard, or even see the street signs as you're driving. Without the right perspective, you may be headed in the wrong direction. And so for me, that is what I'm looking to do, is to, although I didn't accomplish many of the things I wrote about as a kid, I'm looking at how can I reimagine what life looks like 20 years from now? I am, as we're recording this, I'm 33 years old. What would life look like at 43? What would life look like at 53? To be honest with you, I feel like I'm just getting started. Even though I started my career at 17, I still feel like I'm just getting started. So that's what I think about it. I have not accomplished anything that I wrote in my books. I wrote 11 books and none of them were accomplished, but it just opens my eyes to like, man, what was I thinking about as a kid? How can I get that back again?
Yeah, no, I think that's a valuable piece to way to look at it. But I'm curious too now. So you're in video production, and then your next vision that you came up with was venture capitalism. Those are, like you said, completely different realms. So what would you say is your purpose?
My purpose is to lead and empower entrepreneurs to have relentless courage.
I love that.
At 17, when I started the business, it required courage, but it required a relentless courage because the first 5 years I failed in business. I struggled to make $20,000 a year. And then there was a day early in the morning, I woke up to the sounds of chains hitting the floor. And when I ran to the front window to see what these chains were, they were a tow truck driver coming to repossess my car for the second time in 8 months. In this moment, I have a decision to make. Do I continue the business or do I give it up? Because at that point, I had given it a good 5-year run, but I wasn't hitting my stride. And here I am now, the car is being repossessed again. In that moment, I'm sitting on the edge of my bed and I get a call from my client that I had been working with at the time. Her name is Keisha Dior. And Keisha Dior calls me to tell me she's made $1 million in her business, which was a cosmetic business, but it was also a business that I had helped her create a documentary for. So how do I see this? Do I look at this as a moment to say, hey, this client just made $1 million. You're struggling to make 20,000. Okay, you're right. Or do I look at this and say, you're creating something valuable for your clients? Maybe there's one little small piece missing that you can learn how to sell and market yourself to make more money. Well, I went with the second option. And so, yeah, it's how does a person like me go from video production to venture capital? It's like what I said earlier, it's the imagination, it's the dreaming, it is having a different viewpoint, a different perspective to say, no, this is possible. If I choose to look at it a different way. Henry Ford has a quote that I love. Whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. I chose to believe that I can. And so that's what's going to help me, in my opinion, help me take that next big leap. When I retire in 5 or 4 years at this point, when I retire, it will be that, is just creating the imagination now. I mean, that's why I'm giving myself 5 years, or I gave myself 5 years, is creating that imagination right now that will help me to believe in it later on down the road. But it takes that relentless courage. It takes that over and over and over believing in yourself. I'll end with this. I have this folder in my phone called the confidence folder. And so anytime someone gives me a compliment, anytime it could be on social media, it can be from a client, I will screenshot it and I put it in that confidence folder. It's an album in my photo album. The reason for that is anytime I'm feeling less than, anytime I'm lacking courage or lacking confidence, I look at that to regain my confidence. Confidence is a muscle that needs to be exercised every single day. What helps me do that is that confidence folder. The way to have relentless courage is to have confidence. Confidence begets courage. It requires taking the first step. And so that's why I've said my story is all about courage. It's about taking that next step over and over and over, dreaming big. But if I can show that to someone else, if I can empower someone else to understand how to do that for themselves, that's all I want to do. The stories that I tell, the stories, my own story plus my client's story, I'm always looking at how can I show someone else how to have relentless courage.
What has been the most powerful story you've been a part of?
I worked with a client, I think this was 2018, maybe 2017, 2018. This client had a business that she was running $100 million business. As we were recording, she sells jewelry, and as we were recording, her fulfillment center, which was a separate vendor, went out of business. And she had to find out how to get her $5 million worth of jewelry out of the business, out of that fulfillment center in 3 days before it gets locked up in litigation and all these other things. If she did not do that, her business would go in the ground. She, at first, was obviously petrified. This has never happened before, but was able to figure out how to do it in 3 days. Having been a part of that, having to see it in real time, ironically, that docuseries is called Relentless, but I saw an entrepreneur who did whatever it took, even though it was scary, it was hard, but she did whatever it took to save her business. I think about that story often because that client also said something to me that I was able to capture on camera, or said something about me that I was able to capture on camera. And she said, Jude demands my time. So I'm doing a docuseries with her. Part of it is we film every week, sometimes 2 to 3 days a week. And she thinks, even though she's hired me, she thinks she doesn't have the time. So if I call in and say, hey, what are you doing this week? I'd ask her, and she would say, oh, I don't have time, or you don't have to come this week. There's nothing happening. What's interesting is I got really close with her VP of operations and her executive assistant. And what I would begin to do is I would go to them and say, hey, what is she doing this week? Because she thinks she doesn't have time, but I'm coming anyway. So I need to know what's happening. Well, what she saw that is me having a relentless nature that no matter what, I'm going to keep showing up. Like, you might think it's boring, but there might be something here to capture. That always rings in my ear on those days that it gets really hard, those days like the equipment getting stolen, right? It's slow down, reassess. What is it that you got to do today? What is it that, in the moment that the equipment got stolen, my head of production went to tell the client that, hey, yes, our equipment got stolen, but we are still going to be successful with this project. And I immediately stopped and I was like, hey, I get what he's doing, but I need to tell you the truth. We're not going to be successful. We came in here with 4 cameras, 10 lenses. We only have 2 cameras, 2 lenses. What you're expecting is not what you're going to get, but we're going to try to do our best. Having the courage to tell the client the truth was more important than trying to put lipstick on a pig. It was a bad situation. There was nothing that was going to be pretty about it, but I wanted the client to better understand the full picture, so that when they do get the final product, it's not like, hey, what happened here? Why am I not seeing what I normally see? So yeah, I think it's when you have that relentless courage, it truly changes the way that you show up. And that's why I think about Tracy Lynn. That's the client's name who had the jewelry. I think about her story often because at that point in her career, she was 20 years in business, had gone through so much, but here was another big obstacle that could wipe out her business. It continues to inspire me. It continues to remind me what I love about biographies, or even the stories that I tell. It reminds me not necessarily what the people did, but how they thought and why they thought the way they did. And you're looking to be great. You're looking to take you to the next level, not even just your business, but you, who you have to be, is how you think and why you make decisions. And so that's the story of Relentless is what I continue to see over and over. And that's one of my favorite stories that I've been a part of.
No, I enjoyed that one for sure. What do you tell somebody who doesn't think that they have a story worth telling?
If you're alive, and you've been through experiences, you have a story worth telling. Many people discount their stories. I did for a long time. I didn't tell a Mrs. Donnelly story. This was just like, I don't have a rags to riches story. And yeah, Miss Donnelly gave me business cards, but it wasn't that special. A person that doesn't believe they have a story should stop and sit down and think about a difficult moment in their life and how they got through it. It could be as simple as not knowing where you were going to go to college. And here it is. You applied for 10 colleges and no one accepted you. Okay, what did you do? That's a story. A story is all about a very specific moment in time. and you think about that very specific moment in time where you overcame a challenge, that's a story. So anytime I've had people tell me, hey, I don't think I have a story to tell. It's not about having this dramatic rags to riches story. It's just, what experience have you been through that you can retell me? That's a story. Retell me the very specific experience, the very specific moment in time. So yeah, I always just ask them the question, well, are you alive? If you're alive, you have a story to tell. And it's important to tell that story.
You mentioned struggle, and I think that struggle is an important piece of telling a story. So what would you say has been in your life your biggest struggle?
Only because it's maybe only because it's relative, but the burnout. The burnout caused an identity crisis. I had prided myself on the ability to get through anything hard. I prided my value in my work. But here I am in 2020 being told I can't work as much as I used to work, and that I now need to work less, take on less clients in order to recover. But my identity, my value was tied into what I do. Going through that process helped me understand that I am not valuable just because of what I do, but who I am, being versus doing. It took time. It still has taken time, because I'm not completely out of burnout, to reinvent myself, reinvent the identity in the way that I showed up. It's not just about working hard anymore. It is about just being. And I'll be honest with you, it's just hard. That's hard to just be when you have performed. That is the affirmation that when I perform, when I do, I get an affirmation from it. Not that words of affirmation is my love language, but still I get affirmation from it. Now it's like, oh, it's not about the story you tell. It's about just you. Who is Jude Charles? That is the question I've had to answer in the last 2 years. Outside of the work that I do, who is Jude Charles? And so that's been the hardest struggle, because I've never had to do that the last 30 years. I started the business very young. And yes, I failed at the first 5 years, but I've succeeded the last 10 years. And so who am I outside of that success? And how do I show up as that person, not just the person that can do this thing? That's been the hardest struggle that I'm still going through, if I'm honest. But yeah, it's a story that I get to tell, I choose how I tell that story. I think that's the greatest power that we do not realize as human beings. There are obstacles that get in your way. There are things that challenge you, but you choose how that story ends.
I love that. So as we wind down here, I've got another question that I want to ask before I let you go here. But in over 15 years of storytelling and being an entrepreneur, what's something that you've learned that you think most people get wrong?
That's a lovely question. You don't have to be an entrepreneur. I do not agree with the gurus or people that make you feel bad for not being an entrepreneur. Not everyone is meant to be an entrepreneur. You have to be crazy to want to be an entrepreneur. And I don't mean that as in like a crazy, like the funny kind of crazy that people say. I mean mentally crazy, because entrepreneurship will challenge you in ways you have never imagined. But there's this saying that I really don't like, where people will say, if you're not building your dream, you're building someone else's dream. And in my opinion, your dream could be building someone else's dream. Meaning, if you want to be a part of a team and you realize that is my greatest value, that I know what I'm really, really good at. I know that I can help bring structure to an organization, or I know that I can help bring empathy to an organization, or I know that I want to spend more time with my kids and the family that I have versus at work. And I know that I will constantly be challenged with that if I go to launch a big business or launch a business that does well. That doesn't mean that your dream could be that. It could be that I do not want to run a business. My dream is I want to be there and spend time with my family. Entrepreneurs don't learn that. And they begin to beat themselves up for not succeeding in entrepreneurship when maybe you shouldn't have. Maybe you're a really great number two. Maybe you're really great at being a COO, not the CEO, but the COO, which means you keep the operation going. Knowing that can help you build your dream. Knowing that can keep you happy versus trying to be number one. It's the greatest misconception. And I think the only reason I've stuck out with being an entrepreneur is because I understood I am great at being number one. I am a great leader. It took me a long time to realize I'm a great leader, especially when you're the youngest of 10 children. You don't think of yourself as a leader. But in 2014, when my father passed away, I, Jude, the youngest of 10 children, ended up giving my father's eulogy. My family looked to me to lead them through that process. And I was hid from leadership because I thought leadership was all about being front and center, being the pastor, the president, like the person everyone pays attention to. That's not necessarily the case. Just the person that understands how to lead people, how to guide people along a journey. But that's the greatest misconception, I think, with the world of entrepreneurship, the world of freelancing, the world of all these new things that are coming out today. It's understand what you're great at, understand what drives you, what is going to help you leave a lasting legacy. It doesn't have to be being the entrepreneur. There's other pieces of the legacy that you are responsible for, whether you can leave a legacy of faith and a legacy of fear. You could leave a legacy of constantly working or a legacy of being there for your family and being present. It's just, it's choosing how you want the story to play out and owning that. You don't have to be number one. You don't have to be the entrepreneur. You don't have to be the one having billion-dollar exits. It's bigger than that. Life is so much bigger.
I think that's such a powerful way to end this conversation and to send people off with a beautiful way of looking at self-awareness in my mind. I think that was just such an awesome way to deliver a message that I think so many people can win from that, because we can have purpose doing anything we choose to do. It doesn't have to be one way or the way or that way. And I love that. So before you go, though, I do want to give my listeners an opportunity to connect with you. So where can they find your work? Where can they see what you're doing next? And if they're looking for some to work with you on the side, let's get them connected with you. So where can they find you?
Yeah, so I talk about leadership, storytelling, and persuasion through my Dramatic Leverage newsletter, which is called, where you can find at judecharles.co/newsletter. It's called the Dramatic Leverage newsletter, but that's where you can find it. That's where I have conversations. Like if you respond to the newsletters that I write, I communicate back with you, and I am always open to answering any questions that you may have. But that's why I teach some of these concepts that I talk about, which is vision versus perspective, choosing to play the game that you want to play. Is there the Dramatic Leverage newsletter, judecharles.co/newsletter.
And I'll make sure that ends up in the show notes. I actually signed up for it earlier today, so I'm excited to get some more information from you. This was such an absolutely incredible conversation. I thank you so much for taking time to join me today. Jude, it's great to meet you, and I'm looking forward to continuing this relationship.
Charles, thank you for having me. It definitely was a great conversation, great questions. So you had me thinking, which I love. I love a great host that gets me to think about things I haven't thought of before. So thank you for having me, man.
I appreciate that. As always, guys, keep reaching for the stars. Fall flat on your face. Remember, whenever we fall, always get up. Thank you for joining us today on the Edge of Greatness podcast. If you haven't yet, please take a minute now to subscribe and review our show. Join us again next week as we continue to dig deeper into the key components of greatness. The path to greatness is never linear, so remember to keep pursuing greatness no matter what. Keep stretching your abilities, reach for the stars, and fall flat on your face. But remember, no matter what happens, whenever we fall, always get up. Until next time, I'm Charles Schultz, and this was the Edge of Greatness podcast.